acquiring more and more knowledge and responding from that knowledge-caught action. And so our brain is full of occupancy. What if I told you that many of the thoughts you experience might not come from your conscious mind, but from deeper sources? What if the voice in your head, the one you've spent your entire life listening to, is not your own creation but something far more mysterious? Thoughts are like the wind. This isn't a question meant to unsettle you, though it might at first. It's meant to open a doorway, one that leads to a deeper understanding of yourself and the unseen forces shaping your life. You might believe that your thoughts are the purest expression of who you are, but ancient wisdom suggests something entirely different. Take, for example, the idea shared by sages from Eastern traditions. Thoughts are like the wind passing through you but never truly belonging to you. In meditation practices, the mind is often compared to the sky, vast and untouched, while thoughts are likened to clouds drifting across its surface. You don't create the clouds, you only watch them come and go. The moment you grasp this truth, a profound realization dawns. You are not your thoughts. You are the awareness behind them. This idea isn't just an abstract metaphor. The great mystic Ramana Maharshi once taught that the source of thought lies not within the individual but in a collective energy, an infinite reservoir of consciousness he called the self, a force that exists beyond words, labels, or identity. According to Maharshi, our everyday thinking is simply a fragment of this greater energy, a reflection of its vastness in our limited minds. But if you've never truly thought anything, then what is the purpose of this ceaseless mental chatter? Why does it arise and how does it shape your life? The question then is not whether you create your thoughts, but how you respond to them. Do you feed the thoughts that lead to love, peace, and growth? Or do you nourish the ones that drag you into fear, anxiety, and despair? In the modern world, this battle plays out in subtle ways. Consider how easily your thoughts are influenced by what you consume. A single headline can fill your mind with panic, while a moment of kindness from a stranger can inspire hope. These external forces shape the winds that blow through your mental sky, and without awareness, you might mistake them for your own truth. The Buddha taught that suffering arises not from the presence of negative thoughts, but from attachment to them. When you believe a thought is yours, you cling to it, letting it define your reality. But when you see it for what it is, temporary, external, and fleeting, you free yourself from its hold. This freedom is not just philosophical. It is transformational. Imagine living a life where you are no longer at the mercy of every passing thought. As you sit with this idea, notice the thoughts that arise. Are they questioning, doubting, or resisting? Are they peaceful, curious, or open? Whatever they are, let them drift like leaves on a stream. Know that they are not you, and they are not yours. They are simply passing through, part of the infinite dance of life. In the stillness that follows, you might hear something deeper, a voice that doesn't speak in words but in the language of being. This is the essence that the mystics have pointed to for centuries, the source of all thought, yet untouched by thought itself. It is here, in this quiet space, that you begin to understand what it truly means to live. This subtle realization is profound. While it seems like we are in control of our thoughts, orchestrating them like a conductor with a symphony, the reality is far different. Thoughts arise spontaneously, unbidden. They flow like a river without a clear source. If you were truly the master of your thoughts, wouldn't you simply stop overthinking whenever you wanted? Wouldn't you silence the incessant chatter of anxiety, fear, or self-doubt with ease? Yet this doesn't happen. The mind continues, like a wind that blows without asking permission. Identifying with your thoughts is the reason these thoughts hold so much power over us. Not because they are inherently significant, but because we identify with them. We claim them as ours, believing that we are the ones thinking them. This identification creates a sense of ownership, and with ownership comes attachment. When you think, I am anxious or I am failing. You are binding yourself to these fleeting mental states as if they define you. But what if they don't? What if these thoughts are simply passing clouds in the sky of your awareness, and you are the vast, unchanging space beneath them? This misunderstanding of thought is where many people struggle. In meditation, they approach it as a task to accomplish, believing they need to clear the mind or stop thinking. But meditation isn't about doing. It's about being. It's about sitting with whatever arises, including the storm of thoughts, without resistance or judgment. Thoughts may come and go, but you remain steady as the sky, observing it all without becoming entangled. The mind, for all its brilliance, is a tool like any tool. It serves a purpose when used correctly. You pick it up when you need it for a specific task and then set it down when the task is complete. But for most of us, the mind has taken over. Instead of being a servant, it has become a master. It's repetitive. Often negative patterns drain our energy, leaving us exhausted and trapped in cycles of worry, regret, and anticipation. This compulsive thinking is addictive. It offers a false sense of control and fleeting pleasure, a momentary distraction from discomfort. But like all addictions, it ultimately leads to pain. The mind whispers, "Just one more thought, one more worry, and you'll figure it all out." And so we chase, caught in an endless loop, never realizing that the relief we seek can only be found by stepping off the hamster wheel altogether. The dangers of an idle mind. The saying, "An idle mind is the devil's workshop," often evokes images of laziness breeding mischief. But have you ever paused to consider what it truly means? More importantly, what if the idle mind doesn't refer to the absence of action, but rather to the aimless wandering of thoughts, unchecked and unquestioned? This kind of mental idleness is far more dangerous than any external temptation. Yet here's the irony. Even when our minds feel active, when thoughts race and multiply, we are often idling in place, trapped in loops of worry, judgment, and self-criticism. But here's where the twist comes in. You have never thought anything, not really. The flood of thoughts you experience may not always stem from deep personal insight or creativity. Many people experience thoughts that seem to arise spontaneously, often beyond conscious control. They don't belong to you. They don't define you. Yet, like moths to a flame, we are drawn to them, believing that they hold the answers, or worse, that they are us. An idle mind, then, is not a quiet or empty one. It's a mind that clings to thoughts without questioning their origin or purpose. It's a mind that has forgotten its true nature and surrendered itself to the devil of identification. And who is this devil? Not some external force, but the ego itself, the false sense of self that thrives on separation, fear, and judgment. Consider this. When the mind is left to wander unchecked, it doesn't rest in peace or clarity. Instead, it stirs up chaos, like a car idling in neutral that burns fuel without moving forward. The devil's workshop isn't some mystical realm. It's the mental patterns that replay endlessly: self-doubt, resentment, and fear of the future. These patterns are the tools with which the mind builds walls around your true essence, keeping you trapped in an illusion of limitation. What if instead of fighting this devil, you simply stopped giving it a workshop to do? To do this, you must first see thoughts for what they are: fleeting, insubstantial, and not truly yours. Ancient spiritual teachings often describe the mind as a mirror reflecting everything it perceives but creating nothing of its own. The Tao Te Ching says, "The mind of the sage is like a mirror. It reflects everything but clings to nothing." In other words, thoughts come and go, but you are the awareness in which they appear, not the mirror smudged with their residue. When you begin to disidentify from your thoughts, the so-called workshop collapses. The tools of anxiety and overthinking lose their power because you no longer pick them up. You stop spinning imaginary stories about what could go wrong or how the past could have been different. In their place arises a deeper stillness, a recognition of the space between thoughts, the real you. But what about those moments when the mind feels overwhelming, when the devil seems to be running the show? These are opportunities, not curses. Even the most relentless thought patterns lose their grip when you turn the light of awareness on them. Imagine the devil not as a threat but as a shadow cast by your own forgetting. Shadows dissolve not through force, but by the presence of light. Here's the liberating truth. You don't need to fight your thoughts or silence them by sheer willpower. You only need to stop identifying with them. When you realize that thoughts are happening, but no one is thinking them, you free yourself from the illusion of control. The idle mind ceases to be a workshop for chaos and becomes a gateway to presence, a vessel for creativity and peace. The great spiritual teacher Ramana Maharshi often said that the mind's true nature is silence. Noise arises only when we forget this. An idle mind is not the problem. The problem is the mistaken belief that the noise within it is who we are. When you stop fueling this belief, the mind finds no home to dwell in. So the next time your mind feels idle, whether it's spiraling in worry or simply stuck in a loop, pause and observe. Ask yourself, who is thinking these thoughts? Where do they come from? And where do they go when I stop feeding them with attention? You'll find that they fade into nothingness, leaving behind the vast open space of your true self. In this space, the devil's workshop doesn't just crumble, it transforms. The same mind that once harbored chaos becomes a temple of clarity. It no longer traps you in illusion but serves as a tool for your highest potential. An idle mind, when freed from identification, becomes the fertile ground where awareness blooms. It no longer belongs to the devil but to the divine essence of who you are. As explained, the root of this compulsion is the ego, a false self constructed from past experiences and future projections. The ego is not a villain but a survival mechanism, an identity cobbled together to navigate the world. It clings to memories of the past and anticipates threats or rewards in the future. But in doing so, it distorts the present moment, projecting its fears and desires onto what simply is. The ego's primary concern is survival, not in a physical sense, but in maintaining its own sense of existence. It is constantly scanning for ways to reinforce itself, whether through achievements, validation, or even suffering. Ironically, this drive to survive is what keeps us stuck. The ego thrives on separation. I versus you, good versus bad, success versus failure. But this division is an illusion, a mirage created by the mind. The ego is a master of disguise. It pretends to be you by clinging to your memories, desires, and fears. It says, I am the thinker. I am the doer. Without me, you are nothing. But this is the greatest trick it plays. The ego is not an entity. It's a construct, a collection of thoughts about thoughts, a hollow echo-claiming substance where none exists. It might be possible that the sense of self, the ego, does not fully control or originate the thoughts you experience. Many spiritual teachings address the illusion of the ego. The Bhagavad Gita speaks of the ahamkara, the I-maker, which convinces us that we are separate from the whole. Buddhism describes the anatta, the concept of no self, which reveals that our sense of individuality is a fleeting illusion. Even modern neuroscience supports the idea that the self is not a fixed entity but a narrative constructed by the brain. These teachings all point to the same liberating truth. The ego is not your master. It is merely a passenger on the ride of awareness. Yet breaking free from the ego is no small feat. The ego's grip feels unshakable because it feeds on identification. Every time you think, I am anxious or I am unworthy, the ego tightens its hold. It thrives on the belief that your thoughts are who you are. But if you can take a step back and observe those thoughts as passing clouds, something extraordinary begins to happen. The ego's power diminishes. The present moment holds the key to freedom, but as long as you are identified with the ego, you cannot truly access it. The ego is always somewhere else, dwelling on what was or imagining what might be. It resists the stillness of now because in the present, the ego cannot exist. The now is infinite and timeless, and the ego thrives only within the confines of time. Yet thinking itself is not the enemy. It is a gift, a tool that has propelled humanity to great heights. The problem arises when the mind dominates, overshadowing the deeper dimensions of your being. Imagine a beautiful, expansive landscape obscured by a small loudspeaker blaring static. The static is the noise of compulsive thinking, and the landscape is your true essence, spacious, peaceful, and untouched by the chaos of thought. Imagine this: you're standing by a river watching the water flow. Each ripple represents a thought, and the river seems endless. Some believe the ego makes us identify with the flow of life as if we are the river itself. But what if you are not the river? What if you are the one watching it, untouched by its flow? This shift from identifying with thoughts to observing them creates space. In that space, you glimpse your true nature. The ego, of course, resists this revelation. The ego may resist change as it fears its own dissolution. It will whisper, "If you let go of me, who will you be? What will you become without your stories, your fears, your ambitions?" But this fear is another illusion. Breaking free from the ego can lead to rediscovering the deeper self, which has always existed beyond the ego. A parable often told in Zen Buddhism illustrates this beautifully. A student asked the master, "How can I become free?" The master replied, "Who binds you?" The student hesitated, then said, "Myself." The master smiled and said, "Then why don't you untie yourself?" The idea that the ego binds us suggests that the chains are of our own making. The key to freedom is in recognizing that you were never truly bound. Breaking free from the ego doesn't require force or struggle. It requires awareness. Start by noticing how often the ego speaks in terms of I and mine. Observe how it attaches itself to achievements and failures, claiming them as proof of its worth or unworthiness. When you catch the ego in the act, don't fight it. Fighting only strengthens its grip. Instead, shine the light of awareness on it. See it for what it is, a phantom with no real power except what you give it. Life itself is a constant opportunity to break free from the ego. Every time you face a challenge, notice how the ego reacts. It might say, "This is unfair," or "I deserve better." These thoughts are its way of asserting control. But what happens if you meet the challenge without ego? What if instead of resisting, you surrender to the flow of life, trusting that each moment is exactly as it should be? This surrender is not weakness. It's the ultimate strength. When you're no longer entangled in the mind's dramas, you become more present, more alive. You begin to notice the simple joys that were always there but hidden behind your thoughts. The warmth of the sun on your skin, the sound of a bird singing, the steady rhythm of your breath. These moments of presence are where freedom begins. But what about the heavy emotions and difficult thoughts that seem impossible to escape? Here's the secret. They lose their grip when you stop fighting them. Resistance only strengthens the chains. Instead, invite those thoughts and emotions to be seen. Feel the sadness, the anger, the fear without judgment, without trying to fix or change anything. In doing so, you'll discover that these emotions, too, are transient. They come and they go. The poet Hafez wrote, "Fear is the cheapest room in the house." I would like to see you living in better conditions. To find freedom from your mind is to move out of the cramped, dark room of fear and into the spacious, light-filled house of presence. The mind can be a tool, but it doesn't have to dominate us. Freedom is not something to be earned, but something that can be realized within. It's not found in more thinking, but in less. Beneath the noise of the mind lies a stillness that has been with you all along. That stillness is your true self, waiting patiently for you to come home. Rediscover the essence of thinking. The essence of thinking is pure awareness. Before thoughts take shape, there is an infinite field of stillness and a vast potential for creativity and insight. This is the source from which all thoughts emerge. In its unfiltered state, this essence is not bound by fears or desires. It is free-flowing, limitless, and deeply connected to the universal consciousness that pervades everything. This shift in perspective is transformative. When you stop identifying with the content of your thoughts, you begin to notice the spaces between them. These gaps, however brief, hold the key to rediscovering the essence of thinking. In those moments of stillness, you glimpse the truth. Thoughts are not yours, and they do not define you. They are like clouds passing through the sky of your awareness, temporary and insubstantial. Consider a parable often told in meditation circles. A young seeker approaches a wise sage and says, "Master, my mind is always racing. How can I find peace?" The sage hands the seeker a cup of tea and says, "Stir this tea until it is calm." The seeker stirs furiously, but the tea only becomes more agitated. Finally, exhausted, the seeker stops. In the stillness, the tea settles on its own, revealing a clear reflection. The sage smiles and says, "This is the essence of thinking. It becomes clear not through effort, but through stillness." This clarity doesn't mean the absence of thought. It means allowing thought to arise and pass without clinging to it. When you no longer wrestle with your thoughts or try to control them, you begin to experience their true nature. Some thoughts are practical, guiding you through daily tasks. Others are creative, sparking inspiration and insight. And still others are simply echoes of past experiences or anticipations of the future. But none of these thoughts define who you are. Rediscovering the essence of thinking also reveals its beauty. When freed from the ego's grip, thoughts can be like poetry, effortless expressions of the infinite. They can connect you to the world in ways that feel profound and sacred. Think of the great philosophers, poets, and scientists throughout history. Their greatest insights didn't come from trying to think harder, but from moments of surrender, where thoughts flowed from a place beyond the self. This is the paradox of thinking. The less you try to control it, the more profound it becomes. By stepping aside and allowing the essence of thinking to flow naturally, you align yourself with the greater intelligence of the universe. In this state, thoughts no longer feel like a burden or a battleground. They become a dance, a symphony, a gift. The essence of thinking is not something you can force or fabricate. It is something you rediscover by letting go of the need to own your thoughts. When you do, you realize that thinking is not a personal act, but a universal process.